Ever wonder how a breakthrough idea actually becomes reality? Hi, I'm Susan Lindner, and this is the Innovation Storytellers Show, where I sit down with the change makers behind the world's most inspiring innovations to learn how they did it and the stories that help them make it happen. If you've ever had a big idea or want to tell yours in a more powerfully connected way, you're in the right place. I promise you'll get new ideas for how to tell a better story to your audiences too. So let's dive in. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of Innovation Storytellers, where I gather the greatest minds in innovation to talk about how they tell stories to get their big ideas across the finish line. Not to mention getting through all of the politics, insights, strategies, roadblocks, you name it, in order to get our innovations accomplished and also to gain momentum through the organization. And that's why I'm really excited about my guest today. We had the good fortune of meeting at Innovators, I believe, right? So shout out to Hunts Ball Makers and the entire Innovators community, where we were discussing all things innovation, AI, storytelling, you name it. And I had the good fortune of meeting Vlora Muslimi. She is a senior manager at TD Bank with more than 15 years of channel experience in digital, omni, and contact centers. No easy part of the organization for sure. She is responsible for identifying and delivering and leading a portfolio of new digital capabilities to drive productivity and engagement across TD's 95,000 colleague base. Vlora is a skilled business leader who has implemented more than 25 digital products and services, resulting in huge impacts on more than 9 million customers. She is passionate about innovation and leveraging new technologies to create personalized customer experiences and has a proven track record of delivering impact through transformational enterprise initiatives. That is a mouthful, and that is an incredible background and experience. Vlora, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan.
So this was great. We had the good fortune of meeting. I got to give a workshop there on innovation storytelling, and I think it was such a fantastic event. 250 European innovation leaders who were predominantly European innovation leaders who were really sharing what's going on in the world right now of innovation. And so, Laura, I'm so curious, how did you get into innovation? What was your pathway and your door in?
Thank you so much, Susan. I really, really appreciate this. So I'll talk a little bit about my origin story in terms of what got me into innovation. And I have an uncommon path to innovation. I actually came into it more so through operations and people management. So if I take a step back, as you mentioned, I actually started my career in contact centers. And it was one of those things that happened almost by accident, I almost want to say. It was one of those things that was going to be for a short amount of time. And here I am almost 20 years later. What I noticed early on in my career in a busy place like a contact center where you are under pressure to perform all the time is that colleagues were always facing these issues around essentially non-optimal processes and essentially legacy tools. And this caused friction, of course, on the colleague side and on the customer side. My path to innovation was really around problem solving. It was around how do we go incrementally solve for these things in order to make a better experience for everyone involved. And what I also noticed is that if you execute something, if you deliver something and it causes friction for one side, so let's call it the employee side, it actually is not going to stick. And same vice versa. If it's causing friction from one party, but it makes things easier for the colleague side in frontline facing operations, it just doesn't last very long. So that is my path to innovation. It's funny, it was very core to essentially how I grew in my career. I went on to work, as you mentioned earlier, into digital product development and of course now innovation. But those early years in terms of, how do we actually make things in a way that they work for both customers, make things easier, but also colleagues really stayed with me regardless of what role I had.
I think this is like so interesting for me because people often think of innovation as tech, right? It's like,
Hmm.
I got a cell phone. I must be innovative. I remember when I was getting into tech PR, I thought to myself, well, I have a Hotmail account. I think I'm ready to get into tech, to shift out of healthcare and move into tech. But the coming at it from the people perspective is like when it comes down to all of this, it's humans who have to implement all of the technology, all of the change, all of the shifts that we're trying to promote as part of the innovation work that we do. So if we don't have a grip on the people side of the equation, we're really going to be lost, aren't we?
That's exactly it. And I think that
Mhm.
gets lost sometimes, especially when we use the word innovation. It means different things to different people. But at its core, it's around introducing some change to make things better, but however you define better, for the future state. In order to get there, though, you do need to work through people. You need to work not just to identify the crux of the problem and what you're solving for, because I've lived that too, where you solve for the symptoms versus the root cause. But also, in order to make it come to life, it rarely happens in a vacuum. You have to
Right.
work through people. And so that is fundamental, but we don't talk about that as much.
Yeah. And, when you go back to early business and business models, you realize that pretty much all businesses were set up on some kind of command and control structure like the military, right? There was a
Yes.
captain in charge who then had his, delegates and then his lieutenants and so forth and so on. And you could command and control the people that you worked for. But we don't live in those kinds of organizations anymore. And if we want people to adopt the new piece of software, to take on the new business model shift, et cetera, then we have to start with people strategies. So could you give us like a little hint or insight that you've gained over time, given your where you've come from? What do you think innovation leaders don't think about or should be thinking about when it comes to implementing change with people?
One of the biggest things that there's obviously from a management perspective that there is lots out there in terms of how to do this right. But I would say at its core, there is this piece around empathy. And the reason why I say that and I pull that sort of at its core is because we are so eager to drive the outcome, to do the thing that needs doing, that we forget sometimes that if there's resistance or a lack of adoption or pushback, whatever you want to call it, it's not necessarily because people are doing it just for the sake of doing it. There's
Mm,
clearly something standing in the way. And oftentimes that could be tangible. It could be because it conflicts with something else and it doesn't feel good. But a lot of times it's intangible. It could be something like fear. It could be something like, something else, which is basically fear of moving ahead and their world changing. And I think having that level of empathy, going from the assumption that everybody wants to do a great job, everybody wants to do the thing that they need to do in order to excel. However, how we get there may feel different for different people. I think starting from that point of view, it truly removes these layers of what I'll call politics and me versus them. It creates a level of engagement that it will move things a lot quicker and focusing on the right things versus on the things that just don't matter, quite frankly.
part of the work when I'm doing storytelling with teams is I start with an empathy map. And for our listeners, if you're not familiar, IDEO developed this empathy map in order to help you step into the shoes of the people who were going to take on your innovation. And it started off with software developers who were trying to get people to go from version 1.0 to version 2.0 of a software. When they're like, we really love this. Why are you changing it? And every time Apple updates the software on your phone, people are like, oh, I want to go back to the old way. I really knew where everything was on my phone and now I can't find it. And right. There are very few of us who are super excited about change.
Yes.
And so empathy is the cornerstone. If you take away nothing else from this conversation today, although there's going to
Yes.
be a lot of nuggets, is to remember the empathy of the listener. And two questions I always want to make sure that people answer when they're doing empathy related work is step one, what is the pain that my user is currently experiencing that I help to
Mm-hmm.
alleviate with the change that I'm offering? right? So can I
Yes.
really centered on the agony? I'm a New Yorker, so I ask the question, where is my listener bleeding from the neck? Because
Mm-hmm.
I want my innovation to stop the bleeding. And if
Yes.
there's bigger disease, I come from a public health background. If there's a bigger disease happening on the other side of that, is I want to be there with the chemo, the radiation, and all the follow up. If it truly is a cancer, I want to be there throughout the healing process, all the way into the
Yes.
yoga and the acupuncture and everything else. I want my innovation to be able to guide them through that process. So, number one is the pain, and number two is the gain. So, can I be really clear if I'm empathetic about what my listener, not me, but what my listener wants to get out of the innovation that I'm providing? So, it might be saves time, saves me money, makes me more productive. Or it might be if I can rally my team together and we can do all those three things, can I get a raise or a promotion? Can I be out the door at 6 o'clock so I can go to my kids' soccer game? Can I actually take a 2 week vacation and not have to check my phone and check in with my team every single day? Like maybe that would be the gain rather than what I think of my innovation is, elevating us against the competition, which might be important to me, but not important to my team. So, like,
Exactly.
those are the two drivers for me, pain and gain. And the extra credit is what is the agony I'm about to inflict on my subject, right, as part of this change? And can I be honest and transparent about this isn't going to be easy, or this is going to hurt a little upfront, but it's going to be worth it?
I love that. I think from a pain and gain, again, part of what I've learned over the years is that don't assume what the pain or even what the gain is
Mm-hmm.
going to be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at it through your eyes, their pain may be different. And so asking the questions and not assuming on those two fronts is very important in order to get it right. And I would say that the third one that you had around being open and honest, that this is going to hurt. I think we miss that sometimes, or we sometimes sugarcoat it. It's like, oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to be so great, or focus too much on the end state. But the fact of the matter is that there's a journey in there. There's a part that is going, as you said yourself, it's going to hurt. So
Yes.
let's be honest about that. And everybody knows it, so you might as well call it out.
Otherwise, people start imagining the pain, and
Yes,
that can be 10x worse than what is actually going to be.
always.
Great. So tell us about some of the innovation that you've worked on, Vlora. Like, I'm so curious to hear, especially from your consumer teams and your digital initiatives that you've worked on. Can you share with us some of the innovation that you've worked on? And then I want to hear the stories that you got to tell in order to get those big ideas across the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer that question, maybe I'll dig a little bit deeper in terms of this unique and quite frankly privilege that I have in terms of doing my current job and what is the role of my team. So the bank very early on recognized that colleague innovation, especially grassroots innovation, is extremely important in how we get things done. Because generally speaking, large organizations are very good at top down and running initiatives that way. But sometimes they miss that voice of the employee and what's
Mm-hmm.
actually happening in where the work is getting done, where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So,
Mm-hmm.
very naturally, the employees started to provide these ideas in terms of, hey, why don't we fix this? Why don't we change this? And businesses themselves looked to quote unquote catch those ideas and implement them. And it was about 6 years ago that the bank made an incredible decision to say, you know what, why don't we create a centralized team? And this
Mm-hmm.
centralized team will act as an unbiased team that actually talks about best practices in terms of how we do innovation. They will run R&R, we will do the platform. So they will have some common grounds in terms of how to do this best so it doesn't feel very siloed across the bank. And that's what happened. That is my team that I run today. I have people within my team that essentially get assigned to the various business areas. They run learning sessions around innovation and the things that we're talking about. Here's what to expect when you come up with an idea. It's not going to be all rainbows and butterflies. Here's some of the things that you're going to run into. Here's how you work with the allies. and other product people to make it come to life. And the other fundamental shift was around reward and recognition, because sometimes we take it for granted that people are going to engage and they want to do these things better. And they do, they truly do. However, it is always nice to recognize them. It's always nice to reward them and call it out, sometimes from the mountaintop, to say, you did a great things. And even more
Mm,
importantly, here's how you got it done, so that other folks who are listening can actually see, oh, maybe that could be me next. And this is what
mm,
another idea that I have, that I can get it through the finish line. So that is what we do. We are almost, I want to say, consulting within the organization to get these ideas through the finish line. And just to put it into perspective, from submissions, from the ideas that come through, we're not talking, small numbers. We're talking anywhere between 16,000 to 18,000 ideas that come through on an annual basis. And then we
wow.
looked, yes, exactly. So these are not
That's a lot.
ideas that is a lot. Absolutely. And we just actually had an announcement. We had a display at Union Station in Toronto where we showcased 100,000 ideas. That is the mark that we hit. And it was, these small light bulbs essentially that lit up, and it showcased the power, what can happen when even incremental small ideas come to life, and the change, the momentum that they can create.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, what stands out for me, because you asked me, I want to come back to you, what kinds of innovation I've seen. I've seen big ideas, I've seen small ideas. I mentioned earlier about an idea that I'm super proud of in terms of the changing the adjudication process for new to Canada customers. Another one that actually just won the Big Innovation Award for this year, 2025, was changing the onboarding process for new hires. Because what happens in a large organization, we bring you on board, and generally speaking, that department has a way to onboard you, shows you sort of like the, how to get your job done, so to speak. But what is critical, and what we heard from colleagues, is to say a large organization is difficult to navigate sometimes, and people want to connect, people want to learn, people want to understand what their next step could potentially be, and they want to understand that a lot earlier on than we think they do. So again, with ideas, we installed sort of an onboarding program that actually collected feedback at regular times from the colleague themselves. That is something that got implemented, and then we're seeing change, not just from a experience perspective and how they feel, but also in terms of retention, because that let's be honest, that costs money to any organization when they bring somebody on board and within the first year that they do leave. And a lot of times people leave not because they can't do the job, they leave because they lack connection within the organization as well.
Yeah. This is the part I think that people fail to get. And psychologists and other people who study brain science of actually what makes people stay. And the key determinant of whether or not an employee stays in the job is whether or not they like their manager and whether or not they make friends with their coworkers within the first
Mm-hmm.
3 to 6 months. And when they feel a connection, like we think about just being as acceptance, right? Or just do your job, but it's not an indicator of whether or not people will stay. And the investment made in enrollment is just huge. Can we go back for a minute though to like the innovation process that you're working on and collecting 100,000 ideas? How do you organize something like that across the enterprise? How do you funnel for it? How do you make the request of the employees? What kind of ideas you're looking for? Like, how does that all come together?
Oh, I love you asking me that question. That is something that, again, it's a bit of an art and a bit of a science. And what I mean by that is the logistical process. That there's obviously, there's lots of platforms out there that specialize in this. But then the challenge becomes, in terms of, once you have these ideas, as you mentioned yourself, how do you actually organize them in a way so that you can get done as much as possible? So meaning, how many can actually actualize and come to life? Because an idea is just an idea. Unless you bring it to life, it doesn't hold value. And so the way that we operate internally, at least, is that every idea that comes through, it actually goes first to the line of business that has a specialized team. And sometimes these teams are dedicated to doing this particular job. Sometimes this is a volunteer type opportunity where they essentially review ideas and prioritize them based on the business needs. And the reason why this works so well is because the priorities and the ideas that would work well for, let's say, wealth, for example, are not going to be the same ones that will work well for TD insurance, for example. And so that is why it's so critical that the business itself has a level of control over their own ideas. And once they triage and they decide, for example, what ideas hold the most value or have the greatest probability of coming to life, that is when they get prioritized. And that is also the time where we will play a role to say, hey, that idea potentially started off in, let's say, a contact center, but in order to do a solution, it requires the technology team. So let's play matchmaker there, essentially bring those two teams to life. Can we align and make sure that there is something for the technology teams in order to do this, and something for the contact centers, which there's a more clear view in terms of what the outcome is going to be, and marry them together to bring that idea to life.
Yeah. And, you know, I've heard it from so many innovators on this show is the biggest pitfall of doing these employee-centered innovation drives is all the ideas that don't get implemented, the ones that don't get selected as projects. How do you manage, you know, when you have so many amazing ideas coming in, how do you manage that and the heartbreak, right? When someone says, my idea didn't get picked.
You know, it's interesting you say this. A couple of years ago, and it was just actually coming out of the pandemic, that we realized during the pandemic, the number of ideas that got submitted just skyrocketed. The like opportunities were endless, so to speak. And also in terms of what was getting done was also getting prioritized, because what was important potentially pre-pandemic all of a sudden was not quite as critical as things that were coming through and what needed to get done. So we had that time frame, but then afterwards, and you know, if there's such a thing as after, when around 23, there was what I would call fatigue that the organization was experiencing in terms of innovation. And so, what we decided to do, again, this is empathy. This is where you listen to what people are saying. We decided to set up listening sessions with the senior executives within those departments to say, we're going to put the senior executive at the table and we're going to bring together the ideators that have stayed consistent throughout this process, and let them tell them what's good, what's bad, and quite frankly, what's not working. And so we came together, and some common themes that came up, we thought exactly the same thing. They would be devastated if their idea doesn't come to life. And the fact of the matter is, they said, you know what? I understand that not every idea is going to be implemented, but I want to know whose idea is being implemented, what ideas are being implemented. So the next time I put through an idea, I have a better view in terms of what's going to get done. And so that was very eye-opening, because it changed how we were showcasing ideas that were being implemented. Now we have this whole engine around storytelling internally to say on a quarterly basis, to say these are the ideas that actually win. And then in addition to that, these are the ideas that move forward so that everybody else can learn and quite frankly cheer them on and celebrate them, but also it's a learning experience for them as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that I love this idea of having these listening sessions with senior executives. One other piece of, and maybe this is controversial, I wish it weren't, but I think there is a balance of feminine and masculine energy in the workplace that actually makes it work. And if feminine energy is sitting and listening to one another and really contemplating and taking a moment and delivering that empathy, and everyone has capacity for feminine and masculine energy, right? We both are born with it.
Of course.
But, and then to take this drive, which I think is a lot of masculine energy, to really move projects through the organization with speed and alacrity and tenacity, but this stopping and listening and saying, what is our direction? is so important. And then to say with empathy, we loved your idea. Great idea, not this moment. And now let's all get together and drive this forward. And I think when you have that balance is when things go really well. Otherwise, you have this hard and fast driver, right? That is not taking into account people. And that's when the spinoff happens and we lose people along the way because we haven't done the work of bringing everybody together.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sort of paradox because you're absolutely right. You can't have one without the other. It's a balance.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a view around listening, making sure you're solving for the right problems, ensuring that you're also, I talked about this earlier, you're understanding what is the crux of it because you might get an idea, but the idea itself may be talking about solving a symptom. It may not necessarily be the root cause. And that is when you come in and ask questions to truly get to the root cause. And then you can potentially go back and say, you know what, it might be worthwhile to discuss this with your peers, with your man, whoever you have to get a little bit deeper into it. And then once you get to that, then to say, okay, now it's time for doing, now it's time for execution. And how do we run with that idea in a way that it can be expedited, but also in a way that everybody can agree on. And the other thing too, when on the secondary piece around execution, there's this assumption that as long as it's a great idea, as long as everybody agrees this is like a really good thing to move forward, it's not going to necessarily have problems. And I'm not quite sure I agree with that. There's, part of work, part of getting things done, problems do arise. And
Sure.
it is important from that execution perspective, again, to make sure that you communicate, you align with all the various partners, why this is important. And when problems arise, to say, okay, is this a deal breaker? Let's go back to why we wanted to do this in the first place, and then can we remove this, how do we remove this, get everybody's opinion and move forward. So I guess what I'm saying is that in both of those processes, if you want to call it that, we can use that empathy lens in order to get things done. At least that has been my experience.
And this is where the great stories get made because we came up with an idea, we implemented it, it was successful, is not a story. We sought
Yeah.
ideas from people. We listened really hard. We developed prototypes and we really thought about it. We went back to the drawing board 6 more times. We got buy-in from lots of other people and then we got to scale. And then we saw momentum and still we got pushback from customers and yet we persisted. That is great
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. And we cannot
Yes.
move innovation forward without the stories that surround them. So I'm
Yes.
curious, what is the process of storytelling at TD? Do you have like a formalized way that you do this, or are your teams doing this individually? How does it work?
I love that. I will tell you from a storytelling perspective, it's one of those things that coming into this role, I didn't realize how much storytelling will play a part in terms of the importance and being the success of the role itself. And what I
Mm.
mean by that is, as you mentioned yourself, you can talk about data and you can talk about numbers and performance and all those things. And those are great things to do because we're a bank and I'm sure most organizations want to talk about that. However, at the end of the day, there's the storytelling piece that inspires. There's the storytelling piece that essentially teaches the organization. And then also there's a communication aspect to it as well. So I mentioned earlier that what we learned from employees is not so much that, the heartbreak of your idea is not getting done. It's like, tell me, communicate with me. Why was it not done? Like, tell me, sort of take me along the journey to tell me,
Mm.
how it went through the process, how the decision was made, good or bad, and bad being like it's not going to move forward. And then what can we do better next time? So that communication piece is key as well. Over time, again, going back to the storytelling piece, there is a lot that happens around these learning sessions. In fact, we just did a session with the champions, is what we call them, from each line of business. to say that, hey, if you have an idea, it's great to think about the problem you're solving, how you're going to solution for it, and who's involved. But you must think about storytelling as well. And here's the parts of the storytelling, and here's how you're going to tell the story, because that's what's going to get buy-in from your manager, from your VP, from whomever, in order to say that. And even how do you tell that story? If it takes you half an hour or an hour to tell the story, it may not be quite palatable. So how do you tell that story in ways that catches the attention in a somewhat of a short period of time? So
Right.
teaching it's important. And then the other thing too is that when we do execute ideas, when ideas come to life, and this is on a quarterly basis, we actually have a process where we showcase the stories through the internal intranet site. We have space, we feature the winners, and we tell them what they solved for and how they went about it and what was the pain points that went into. So again, people can relate to when they have an idea and potentially run into hurdles, they can understand that's normal too.
Fantastic. I want to ask you also, what do you think are some of the challenges with getting the story out? What are the challenges with getting your innovation to the finish line that you've been able to overcome?
I would say that the one of the greatest hurdles around getting the story out is around probably resource constraints. I mean, there could be many different hurdles, but it could be resource constraints.
Mm.
So, one of the things that I do see is that there's a great idea, there is agreement and alignment across to say, yep, we want to move this forward. But at all times, you're competing for with different projects, different initiatives, different things that need to get done, so to speak. And how do you get the thing that you want to do to the top of the pile, so to speak? How do you get that ahead, prioritized over the other things? And so I would say that what it becomes important, or what I've seen work best, is leading with the impact, leading with the value piece. What is it changing, and is it really good? And it doesn't always have to be dollars and cents. It could also be impact to the end consumer. That is a huge thing, because that's what we're here for. But again, if there's another project that promises a bigger impact, then yeah, there will be delays, and yeah, that is a hurdle that we live through every day.
Yeah. So I know we can't talk about future plans because we have an SEC for a reason.
Yes.
But what is it that you're looking forward to in 2025? Things that are on your horizon, things that other innovators should keep their eyes open for that we should all be thinking about?
I don't think it would surprise anybody that one of the things that I see a lot more from ideas perspective is ideas related to how do we solve problems through Gen AI. And of course, this is, we get better at solving problems through AI. And I'm noticing ideas that the complexity of the problems that are coming through, the solution or how AI is being applied to them is more sophisticated. And that is something that I'm finding very, very exciting. The other thing, too, that I find very exciting is the fact that I mentioned earlier that we've done 100,000 ideas, and our execution rate, or implementation rate, as we like to call it, is around 10 to 13%, depending on the year. And this is something that I'm on a mission to continue to grow and essentially get more ideas through the finish line. And I'm fully aware that the best way to do this is about all the things that we talked about. The more people are engaged, the more people understand the why this matters, why this is important, and the impact that it has, the storytelling piece that we talked about, you get more people working towards the same direction. And that's when you see more ideas come to life, because more people are engaged in the process, more people believe this matters. And who doesn't want to contribute? Who doesn't want to have their voice heard and come up with the next best idea? But it does require some learning, it does require some understanding, and that's what we provide. So I'm really looking forward to continue to grow that implementation rate as we move into 2026.
Here, here. I think that's fantastic. Laura, I'm
Thank
now
you.
going to ask you the three most important questions that I ask everybody on this podcast. what is the greatest innovation of all time?
iPhone, probably. I
Yeah.
mean, I know that, of course, that there's lots of great innovations, but this is one that I've lived through. And I would say that, it has truly been, even looking back, it hasn't been that long ago since the iPhone has came out. What was it, 2008? And when you think about all the permutations in terms of the changes that it has made in mobile device, it has been absolutely incredible.
And if you could join any innovation team in human history, which team would you have joined?
Hmm. This is probably an unexpected answer, but I would have loved to be part of Ford when they were building the first car. I don't have a background in manufacturing, but again, one of those things that was revolutionary, and I think it was absolutely incredible the way that the team came together to think differently and outside the box.
Absolutely. And my last question is, what is the story that the world needs now? Or what is
Um,
even the innovation that the world needs now?
I will go back to the story. I would say the story that we need more now is understanding and empathy. Because again, I think it's a full circle moment, Susan. It's around innovation is nothing but things becoming better for all people that it impacts. And I think that if we lose that understanding, that empathy piece, I think that the innovation itself matters less.
I couldn't agree with you more. So perfectly said. Vlora Muslimi, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you, how should they do that?
Yeah, I am through LinkedIn, and I also have my first name dot last name at td.com. If you want to reach out, that is another way to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. Vlora, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast. Thank you.
I truly hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that could inspire your own. And if you want to learn more about me or how I can help you and your team to become master storytellers to get your big idea to its finish line, head over to innovationstorytellers.com and schedule a call with me.